Hey guys, welcome to the next tutorial in the RPG Stats series. In this tutorial, we're going to be creating the next stat that extends from the RPG attribute class. Now, this stat will come in very handy for, let's say, the health stat, mana stat, or an energy stat if you have that in your class, because it will be introducing a current value to our stats. Now, this value can be changed at any time, and it will always be between 0 and the stats value. So it will never go outside of that range, and this will be used for your characters, as I said, health, mana, and energy. So you can subtract and add to that based off of items or abilities that you may have in your game. Well, let's get started with this and go into our stat types folder and create a new C# script. This will be RPGVital, and we will open this up and get right to work. Now, in here, we will be removing all the mono behavior methods and changing it from a mono behavior inheritance to a RPG attribute. Now, first thing we want in here is we're going to be creating a private int underscore stat current value. And this will contain our current value for the stat. Now, to access this, we're going to be creating a new public property called StatCurrentValue. And we'll set up a quick getter and a setter for this. Now, for our StatCurrentValue, we want to restrict this between 0 and the stats value. So we have two options. We can restrict it in the set method, or we can restrict it in the get method. Now, each one will have their own benefits, but we don't want to set it in the set method because if we restrict it when we set the value and then later somehow the stats value decreases below what the current value is, and then we come back and get the stats current value, this value could be higher than the stats actual value. So we'll have a health value or mana value beyond what we want it to be, the max. So in the get method, we will be restricting our current value by adding a few if checks. First off, our first if will be checking the stats current value is greater than the stat value. And if it is, we're going to simply set the stats current value to stat value. And then else, if the stat current value is less than 0, we will want to come in here and do stat current value equals 0. So it never can go below 0 or above stat value. And this is all we will need in the get to restrict it. Now, to add a few more methods to this, we'll come down and add our RPGVital constructor, which will simply set the stat current value to 0. And an extra method that can come in handy later on in your code, and we'll be using it here and there, will be public void set current value to max. And now this method, all it will do is take the stats current value. Actually, let's use the property here. Stat current value property, and set this to the stat value of the stat. So we don't have to go in our other code and be like health dot stat current value equals health dot stat value. We can just straight up call this, and it'll do as quick as it'll just do it quickly. Now, our next thing we're going to be adding to our RPGVital is something for external classes and scripts to be able to listen to our vital and be notified when this stat current value changes. So we're going to be using the event handlers that are built into the system namespace to allow for classes to subscribe to our class's event. So first off, we'll add using namespace system to the top, and then down inside our class, below our private, we're going to create a public EventHandler. And I'm just going to call this onCurrentValueChange. Now, let's go on to the next step before I go into detail. Next, we'll create a private method. It'll be a void. And I'm going to call this triggerCurrentValueChange. Now, all this method will be doing is we're going to be checking if anyone is currently subscribed to our event. And if they are subscribed to our event, we're going to trigger the event and pass the correct parameters that the event may need. So in our triggerCurrentValueChange method, we'll do an if check on onCurrentValueChange. Now, the way we can tell that subscribers are currently attached to our event is if no one is attached to our event, and we check if this is equal to null, we'll get true. So we want to check if it's not null to check if we have a subscriber. So when our current value change is not null, we will call our onCurrentValueChange. And now to trigger this EventHandler event, we can call it just like a normal function. Now, event handlers take a object, which is the sender, and a event args. Later on, we can change this event args and extend the base event args class and make our own args so we can pass arguments into this event based on how we want them. But for now, we're not actually going to use this event args, so we'll be using null here. But the sender object, this is actually just going to be the instance of the RPGVital calling this event. So we can simply put this. And in our arguments, we're just going to put null for now, since we're not actually going to be using any arguments. Now, where do we want to set this? We only want this triggered when the value changes. So when someone sets the current value in the set, we want to check, does the value change? So we want to do if stackCurrentValue does not equal value. So the value's changed now. We're going to set our stackCurrentValue to the new value, and then we're going to trigger the current value change. This way, the event will trigger after we set the current value, so anyone listening will have the new value of the vital to work with. And that is all we're going to be doing in this simple vital class. So we can jump back to Unity. And we will go into our default stat collection and change a few lines of code here. We want to go into our health. Our health is now going to be a vital class. And also our mana. Now, if we do this right now, our vital current value for our health and mana will both be 0 because we are not actually setting the current value stat to max. So in here, we're just going to do a quick call to set current value to max for both our health and our mana. And I'm going to fix this error right here for mana linkers. That might have been a problem in the last tutorial, but yeah, fix that. So now, after our linkers are updated, so we have our greatest, newest stat value for health and our stat value for mana, we're going to set both of their current values to the max value or to their stat value. And this will link everything up correctly. I'm going to come in here and change some of these values for the linkers, just to make them easier to read when we scale up values later on. But, okay, we can jump back. Now, for this new class, I'm going to be, let's see, do I want to... Yes, we'll create a new test script. I'm just going to call this RPGVital test. I believe I may go back and create an additional video creating new individual tests for each object so we can verify that everything's working correctly. But for now, we'll just do this. Jump in here, we can clean this up. And I'm also going to jump back to our other test script. I'm just going to copy paste pretty much all the internal workings. And remove this commented stuff and the scale stat. Now we have, and resolve by using system, fix all that up. Now we have this. So in our start, before we display the stats, we're going to go var health equals stats dot get stat, and this is going to be type vital. That's what we want to work with, and we will go stat type dot health. So we'll get the vital version of the health stat. And now we'll go health dot on current value change. Now, we want to subscribe to this event. So to subscribe to a EventHandler event, we'll go plus equals, and we have to give it a method. Now, I could use tab here to create one real quickly, but I'm going to come down here, and we're going to type this out. So this is going to be a void on stat value change. Now, it doesn't have to be called the same as whatever we're calling from the stat, but in this case, this just makes sense. Now, this method needs two parameters that are the same as the event handler. And earlier we sent in a object called sender and a event args, and we'll just call this args. So you can call these the parameters whatever you want, but normally they're the sender, who's sending the event, and the arguments for the event. For our event, the args are null, and the sender is an RPGVital. Now in here, since the sender is of type object, we would need to typecast it back to RPGVital. So we'll go RPGVital, and just call this vital equals RPGVital typecast of the sender. Now just going to verify that the vital is not null. And if it's not, we're going to debug some text. I'll just format this and go vital this value or vital link on state value change event was triggered. And we'll just do this. And we'll pass in the vital.stat name. Now, one other thing we'll want to do here, actually, nope, that's it. We're just going to get notified when the onValue change event is triggered. So we can take this method's name and add it up to this plus equals. So on stat value change, we only have to pass the name, and it'll know it's that method. And you don't have to do the two parentheses at the end because we're not actually calling it, we're just adding it to this event. So now this method is subscribed to the event. So whenever the health's current value changes, that method will be called. Next, what we'll be doing is we'll go into between our display value or stat values, and we'll go health dot current value. And we're just going to go minus equals, let's say 75. So we'll just subtract 75 from our stats current value. Now, what happens here, let's jump over to our default stats and look at our health base value, which is 100. And then we're also doing a linker of 10 times the stamina, which is 100. So our health should be 200 when we start off. Jumping back to the vital test. So our first display stat values call will display health has 200 value. our next display value call should show health has 200 minus 75, so 125 value. And if that's what it displays, then the setup is functioning correctly. So we'll jump back to Unity, and we can toss our RPGVital test onto any of the objects in the scene, and we will run this. Now I'll move the console back up into the main menu, and we can see this. Our stat values is 200 when we start off. We come down here, and our value health on stat value change event was triggered correctly when we changed the event. And then we see here, oops, our health value is 200. So what's gone on here? Let's jump over to our stat value. Let's see. Yeah, our RPGVital. So first off, stat current value does not equal null or value. We'll set the value and we trigger it. So we come in here and that looks like it's correct. We'll jump over to our test, health stat value. That, Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to do some debugging here real quick. I am not seeing the mistake. Log, we're just going to go set value. Run this. Go to console, set value 125. So the health, oh, wait, that's what we're doing wrong. We want to come back to our vital test. And in our display stat values, this is still just showing the stat value. So what we want to do is we'll come up here to where we're saying RPG stat, change this to RPGVital, and change get stat to our generic version and pass in RPGVital. So we're saying we want to get the RPGVital version of the stat. And we'll do for each stat type. So if the stat does not equal null, or if the stat is not a vital, we're going to do this. Actually, make this work with the other values. Oops. We want to keep this. The stat is not null. We're going to do RPGVital equals typecast of the stat into a vital. Now, if vital is not equal to null, we're going to do one thing. Else, we'll do our normal debug statement. And we'll copy our debug statement back up here, and we're going to change this value to, let's say, /2. Now we'll have the stats name at 0, the current value at 1, and the regular stat value at 2. So we'll have to go stat name, and then add vital dot current value, comma, stat dot stat value. And that should function correctly. Now let's continue on. And we'll run this again. We get some wonky error. Let's see. Ooh, stat as a, okay, I'm going to do this as a softcast as RPGVital. And try this again, see if we don't get the error. And there we go. So we got our health value up here. It's 200 out of 200. And then down here, we changed our current value minus 75 down to 125 out of 200. So that changing is correct, and it looks like it's functioning correctly. So there you go. Now, in the next tutorial of this series, we're going to go back and step through our RPG stats and fix our, let's see, in the RPG attribute, In our stat linker value, we had update linker called every time we get the value from here, which is kind of a poor way to do this. So we're going to go back and use a little bit of event handlers that we learned in this tutorial back to kind of fix our problem with that. So later on, all the stats that implement a current interface that we'll be creating will have their own onValue change event that will be triggered whenever their value changes, which we'll be using to update the linkers, and I believe we may update modifiers as well, but I believe only linkers will be affected for now. But yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff we'll be doing in the next tutorial involving just updating old classes to use events. And then after that, I believe we'll have one more tutorial video with the RPG stats section of the tutorial, and we'll be changing around some of our code to function better with Unity and add a few more functionalities so we can so it'll work better with later systems such as the buff system and item systems that we'll be slowly creating. Well, thanks for watching this video, and I hope it's been helpful, and until next time, good luck.